just last 2 weeks, last month. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're new to the group.
Members.
Look at that. Come on, round of applause for the newbies.
I'm Keely Toro, investor for over a decade. We've been flipping houses. It was pretty much a side hustle for a while. Now it's full-time since Mark left corporate. Realtor, designer, lover of historic bungalows.
I'm Mark Toro, finance geek and leader of a world-class investor group. Let's go. So.
I'm Nick, realtor, investor in both Michigan and Florida. I've been doing this in Michigan probably for 7 years, but then recently, last year, flipping houses here in Tampa with Henry. He handles the construction. This is our probably 6th or 7th one. A couple weeks ago, but we did the house at the end of the street down there, the blue bungalow. When this one came up, we couldn't help but jump on it. We have a wholesaler that we work with a decent amount who actually sold us the one down the street. Once we sold it, we still made all right on it, but it wasn't as deep or not as profitable. Partially my fault overspending, as we talked about on that meeting. But he got a lead on this one, and this time we were able to come in with some solid numbers. We knew what the ARV was going to be because we just created our own comp down the street at 440. So we were able to essentially speak our price. We wanted it at 250 because the other one down there, if you remember, we bought at 290, and we just kind of negotiated, kind of held firm to that close to the 55% of ARV rule, and we eventually settled at 260. Deeper for sure than the last one, and a lot less work.
We all start off and it's kind of one or two, we're learning the business, and then we get to the point where we're doing multiple deals at a time, 3 to 5, and then even beyond that, right? We have some investors in this group that are doing 10, 12 units at a time, right? So Nick, Krista, Henry, they're at this point in their business where they're just scaling up, and you can see, as you're doing projects, you're having successful deals happen. Well, then that opens you up to other opportunities nearby, right? Nick has proven he buys deals, he gets through deals.
A quick recap and kind of why we also wanted to present this property, since we just did one with them and we just did one on the same street, right? There's some cool things about that. That house was slightly smaller than this house, almost 200 square feet smaller, and it had a garage. This one's a little bit bigger. It's in much better condition. It's going to have a higher condition rating because if you remember when we walked the other one, they hadn't really remodeled the kitchen. It was more like a basic flip, right? So this one, because they flipped that house down the street, one of the things I want you guys to think about as an advantage of kind of buying within a certain market is you're creating your own precedent for what your next house is going to sell for. 2 things that are important in that. If you purchase a home, one of the things that we talked about with Nick and Krista was their disposition strategy on that house. If you remember, they finished the house right at the holidays, and they looked at the comps, and the comps weren't great, but they weren't desperate to sell it, right? And so Krista, being the intelligent realtor that she is, she said, let's get creative, let's hold this for a couple months, and let's put it on when the market's a little bit better. And by doing that, they were able to capture a much higher purchase price. So what I want you to think about is, had they fire sold that house, they would not have a comp to drive the price on this up, right? Because they set the precedent over there, what they're now going to be able to do is use this house to drive the price of this neighborhood up even further. This is a smart strategy. It only works if what you're focused on is to keep pushing those price points up in that neighborhood. And the other advantage, right, is that people start to know that this is the neighborhood that you buy in. And so when that wholesaler was in the coffee room and somebody said, oh, I got one coming up on Selma and Tampa Heights, that wholesaler said, because it was another wholesaler that actually got it, right?
Office, yeah.
In the same office, said, wait, I have a buyer. He just closed on one on Selma. They may be interested in this, right? So becoming known for a certain market is helpful, because when you're working with people who know that they can bring you a deal and you're actually going to close, you're able to get better deals, right? One of the lessons that they learned on that last one was they bought it a little too high. They used some emotion, right? And so on this one, they were able to buy a better house in terms of size and condition, right? Condition means less work, right? So their remodel budget on this will be lower. They're also going to be able to push up the price point, and they also bought it deeper. So there's a lot of gain in terms of profit on this house versus that house.
So we're always thinking about risk as an investor, right? So you have overall market risk. Are things going to slow down? You have your budget risk. Did I budget appropriately? Are there unforeseen construction items in the project that I'm going to have to pay for? The real risk for a flipper is the appraisal risk. because the appraisal is just an opinion of value, right? And it really dictates whether or not your buyer, your end buyer, is going to buy your home. When you have set the comp down the road, you are an operator that set that comp down the road. So the appraiser, they can't argue at all and say that that's not a comp, right? It's literally the same execution, same level of finishes, right? The same investor that did the house up the road is the one that's doing the subject property, right? So by taking a project that you've built, a similar project right nearby that is a direct comp, you eliminate the appraisal risk right off the bat. So then everything else is just reverse engineering, right? I have my set 450 price. I know it's solid, it's already proven, and all I need to do is just get through this project and make sure I try to minimize my budget as much as possible to execute at that same level and capture my profit margin.
So these Viking homes over here, if you guys look at which this is a huge selling feature, I think, for this house versus the other Selma house, right? That road wasn't as great, right? But when you look here, like, you're gonna walk your dog, you're gonna walk that way, and you're gonna have a beautiful cluster of new construction homes. This is a real life case study from a builder's perspective, right? On doing exactly what they're doing as flippers.
Exactly
so
right.
Viking will come in, they'll buy up multiple lots, they'll put their best house on the market first, they'll finish that one first, and they'll set themselves with a comp. He will not accept low ball offers on those first couple houses, because he knows if I accept a low offer here, I've now set the price for all of my houses on that block, right? So he's gonna hold out, he's gonna make sure that he's got a really solid buyer, really financially stable, able to bridge that appraisal gap if the appraisal comes in low. And guess what? Now the next house that sells, the appraiser can't argue. We've got precedent that a buyer is willing to pay $789 for one of these new construction homes. It's a no-brainer for the appraiser to do that. So this little cluster right here is a perfect example of that exact strategy. That's a builder that's done it, but they're doing it within this neighborhood with these flips, right?
Yeah. What's really cool too is that you have like the ugly house on the good block, right? These are all brand new homes, right? So no, this is not compared to a brand new construction home in the buyer's mind, right? It's inferior because it's older construction, right? But now he has all of these homes that are bringing up the value of his property, right? Where he didn't have that on the last deal, right? So the last deal they sold for an above asking price because that's what we do.
We're targeting best case scenario an ARV of pretty similar to the one down the street, 450 with the square footage. Acquired it at 260, so 57% of ARV, to a pretty strict $80,000 renovation. So it's gonna leave us a little bit more room. We did the windows and a bunch of things like that on the last house. This one, we're gonna be more focused with the interior design, trying to save the siding, but not overspend, just basically power wash paint kind of thing. So this 80,000 will actually go further, I think, than our $100,000 budget down the street, because we're going to be a little bit wiser with what we choose to take on. We went all out, and I had that same thought as you, but the other house was much worse. We ended up spending close to 15, 16 grand on just sanding, scraping, caulking, and granted, we did higher quality than what was necessary, but this is the worst of it. The rest of the house you'll see is actually pretty good. So this we're probably going to replace with just a hardy board, but the rest of it we're just going to go with the power wash and paint. A little bit less work on this.
You really want to hone in on the wood rot situation, because that budget can get out of control, right? So to reside like an entire bungalow of this size with hardy siding, you're looking at like 20 grand, okay? To repair it and make it look decent, like they spent, would you say 17,000?
Yeah, but it was a little over the top for sure on that one. But we learned from that, so.
To make it look nice.
How we finance the project is always important. So I'll just high level, a project like this, you're probably 85% loan to cost. If you have more experience, 90% loan to cost, right? So you're putting down either 15% or 10%. The fees range, right, between 1% and 3% on hard money loans. So your origination fee is between 1% and 3%, and rates probably between 10.5% and 12.5%, depending on experience. My goal for you guys is not only to make pretty houses, but to learn how to think like an investor. Everybody's business is different. The lower price points, you're probably gonna have to buy deeper to have a good deal. If you're doing full to moderate to full gut renovations, right? But he's buying at 57% of the projected ARV. What's nice is that his rehab costs, he's doing a pro forma here on the rehab costs, but he already has a very similar property, so he knows he's gonna be within this range. As we walked through the property yesterday with Nick, probably have, 10 grand or so of wiggle room We'll
Yeah.
probably go a little bit over budget, but we think it's going to be the items that will really help capture top dollar value, or maybe we even go beyond this 450. What I really want you to focus on is the profit margin. If you see, the total project cost basis is 84% of the projected ARV. So the margin is 16%. What happens is many flippers, they do projects for 5 and 10% margins because they didn't estimate their budget the right way, or they bought too high, right? They didn't buy deep enough. When you're thinking about your deals, put them into a software that also, or do the calculation that also considers your interest carrying cost, right? Be conservative on the amount of time that you're going to spend in the project. So if you're newer, you want to add a few more months, right? If you're more experienced, you have an idea. But I think the general idea here is that he bought a good deal, right? Close to 55% of ARV. He's got 16% profit margin. It gives him a little bit of wiggle room that if something happens, the market slows down. If markets correct, they correct by 5 and 10%. If markets crash, they correct by 20+%. Last crash that we saw was what, 2008? Prior to that, it was like decades before, right? So if you're really thinking about market slowdowns and corrections, it's 5 to 10%. So you don't want to get into a deal that only has 10% margin, because if the market slows down during your holding period, you're automatically losing money, right? So the name of the game is buying right, buying deep, getting used to knowing what your metrics are for your business. So I think this is a pretty awesome deal. 16% profit margin. He bought it pretty deep, close to 50% of ARV. So numbers, we like numbers. Cool.
Our representative called us and said that somebody in the office picked it up, and I think they were still in negotiations with the seller.
Okay.
So they basically asked us what price we wanted it at.
Okay.
And again, the other one was $290. He had already sent photos, and I saw it was in much better shape.
Okay.
But even with that in mind, we said we really wanted it at $250 just for a solid home run.
Yes.
And we ended up settling at $260.
So if you capture that, right? So he bought the house up the road, which was 100 or so square foot smaller. He bought it for $30,000 more than what he bought this house for. But he, right off the bat, made his offer deeper. So why would you have the confidence to go to the same seller and they have a similar property and you're making a way deeper offer, right? It's just because he's learning, hey, part of this business is about negotiating, right? You need to make a solid offer. Let them counter, right? If you're way far off, they're going to let you know. But usually they're going to show their hand on that first offer. When you make that lowball offer, they're going to show their hand on how much wiggle room they have in the negotiation. He offered at $250, he bought it at $260, which kind of feels like flip or flop. Like they counter offered one time and you're like, we'll take it,
Yeah.
So
this is a wholesaler that works with other wholesalers. So he, if you want to be technical, is kind of acting as our buyer's agent on the deal.
So that's one of the advantages. When we have a great SME call with Sean actually in the classroom about kind of best practices for working with wholesalers, right? So a lot of times we think that a wholesaler, or this was my misconception of wholesalers before Sean came around, wholesalers will send you a property, their ARV is not great, you look at it, you're like, this guy's full of crap. And there are some companies that like, I still won't even look at their stuff. That wholesaler who's not going to make anything if he doesn't represent a buyer, because it's another guy that's picking up the listing, right? So it's like, now he can just go to work for Nick and get it at Nick's price, right? So once they know that you're serious, and if you're giving them, like Sean recommended, like giving them feedback, because a lot of times the wholesalers are not necessarily like real estate experts, and they might cast a wide net. So maybe they're an expert in this particular neighborhood, but they pick one up over here that they're not an expert in, but you are. Going back and saying, well, like, here's my comps, here's the numbers I'm coming up with, and then let them go do the legwork and try to get the seller down for you on the purchase price. So like, don't be scared to give a good wholesaler. You don't want to waste your time with like some of these other companies, but if it's a good wholesaler, like give them feedback, and it might not work out. You might end up overpaying for one, but then on the next one, they know that you're an end buyer and they know where you need to be. When you're walking these properties, there may be times where you're doing more of a minimal design strategy, and that's fine, and you're going to make money off of it. You need to be realistic about, is this one that I can do like a quick flip on, keep my costs down and still get a good price and still make money? Or does it make sense for me to do reconfiguration? Does it make sense for me to do heavy construction, pull permits, right? All of those things. So on this one, exterior doesn't need a whole lot. What are your plans for the exterior?
We're going to obviously address the siding. Unfortunately, this is a bad view. This is probably the worst of it right above us here. But this will probably be the only thing we actually replace. The rest we can power wash and sand. We're gonna keep the original windows on this one as opposed to replacing them all like we did on the last one. Just gonna have somebody come in and restore them a little bit, make sure they're functional and make sure they're kind of sanded and painted. So that'll save us a ton. A little bit of work here with this porch, but not go as crazy as before. No composite decking, but we will rebuild these columns so they all match. And we're talking about doing like a cedar accent on this beam to make it look, you know, first of all level, and second of all, you know, just nicer, and then maybe some composite railing and landscaping. And then eventually, yeah, a nice front door.
Some of the key things is you want, like, when a buyer pulls up something like this column, right? It's really important that you would go back in and match out the other columns, because otherwise what you're wanting to do is eliminate buyers perceiving you as like a DIY cut corners flipper. If you want top dollar for a property, you don't want your property to look like you skipped over things that were blatantly obvious, that it only took a little bit of effort for it to look nice. So Nick and I are on opposite sides of the fence, and I'm not going to tell you who's on which side of the fence. But in the old historic bungalows, the fireplace adds a lot of character. Even if it doesn't work, buyers love it. Okay, on the other side of this wall, we're actually going to create a home office out of that large master bedroom. We're going to divide it and create a small home office, so we need a door into there. And if we add a door, we don't have a lot of room for the furniture. So I want a show of hands. Would you keep the fireplace and just have a stager work their magic and have a small couch, maybe a couple accent chairs? Or would you demo out that fireplace so that you can do a large sectional and a little TV table over there, and you lose the fireplace but you have better furniture placement? So raise your hand if you keep the fireplace. Ooh, all right. Nick wins. So, all right. So as a realtor, I'm going to tell you guys are all wrong. You're all wrong. And Chris is on my side, so I feel like we're going to win this argument. So when we're looking at this and we're thinking like, how is a buyer going to perceive this property? If it's empty, right, an investor is going to think, oh, fireplace, that's great, adds a lot of value. I need to create a home office, and they're maybe not thinking through where this furniture is going to be, especially the boy investors in here. But when the ladies come in and they're looking at how they're going to decorate their home, and they realize that they really can't fit like a proper sofa in here, and they can't entertain their friends and family, it's going to be a deal breaker for them. So I've literally been a part of, like, no lie, probably close to 100 bungalow renovations in like consulting and stuff, and I've only ever removed 2 fireplaces. And this is one that I would eliminate that fireplace, and I would make sure that we've got great seating for the door situation. And
so, and let me characterize why, right? So what we try to do is eliminate as many buyer deterrents as possible. So what happens is you'll get a good buyer in here, like a good buyer, that would give you your top dollar, and they're well qualified. And if they don't like this layout here, like, you lost a good buyer, right? So supply and demand, now you have less good buyers attracted to your property. So it's really, it hurts to get rid of the fireplace, but what you're doing is you're eliminating the risk of this buyer deterrent causing you to lose good buyers at the end.
So you're constantly like reevaluating. And so while the fireplace is a great selling feature, it's also not necessarily something that somebody's going to miss. They may say like, oh, I wish this had a fireplace. And it does add to the historic charm, but trust me, on a day-to-day basis, they care more about the fact that they're going to be comfortable when they're watching TV in their living room, right? So you're constantly weighing that.
And it's not like it's perfectly ready to go fireplace. We would still have to put money in to make this look better, taking the tile out, taking that weird afterthought that somebody put on top out. So we're gonna have, it's not like it's a amazingly beautiful fireplace as is. So either way, there's some money is gonna have to be put into it.
But we're gonna make the office the minimal size that we can make it, right? Because we still want to have as nice of a primary suite as possible. We just, to be able to market it as a 3-bedroom, and also because buyers want a home office, we want to squeeze out 1 bedroom, and we can because we've got the space, right? But we're going to make that the minimal size, which means the door has to land kind of where Kayla's standing. So when that front door opens, and I'm a realtor, and I'm like, welcome to this beautiful bungalow that I know you want to buy, it's fully renovated, and the buyer's like, oh wait, there's this like weird door to the office behind this other door. Again, it's a deterrent. So thinking creatively, a double glass French door where the right side is more fixed and the left side is operable. When they open it, you're gonna have a lot of light in that room, in that office. It's not gonna feel like a cave, and the door situation won't be clunky. It'll be a little clunky, but it won't be bad enough to deter people, it'll still feel like that's a proper home office. So like these are details, when you overlook those type of details, every mistake that you make or everything that you overlook could be taking money off of your price that you're able to resell it for, right? So you want to be making smart decisions.
Can we change our mind now on the fireplace?
Maybe a little off track, but in terms of design, how do you choose, or do you consider like what's trendy versus like what's classic and longer lasting?
So that's a good question. So it depends on the house. I would say that one mistake that investors tend to make is just not being like cohesive in their design. So like you'll go and you'll see that the front of the house is an old historic bungalow, and then you go inside and they've got like ultra modern,
super modern
laminate cabinets and
Waterfall countertop.
yeah.
Like a realtor perspective, we see what's on the market, and when it is super trendy, it's like everything that's on the market looks the same, and the buyers get so bored of just seeing the same thing over and over. So if you can add a little bit of character or add a little bit of spice to what's already trending, that is going to make a buyer fall in love, and they will, I feel like, make a decision based on that little feeling than they will based on like everything being the same.
For sure.
A couple of decisions I think that are really important there. Like normally we'd see a tub and we'd say, man, that's like a selling feature. They want an oasis in the master bedroom, right? So we want to keep the tub at all costs. That's our first thought. That was my first thought actually too, right? So, the idea is that we are foregoing the tub, one, to have a private water closet, which is a feature to a degree, but also greater counter space, right? So it's a smaller master bedroom, but you have greater counter space, right, which is going to appeal to both, to the wife who's buying the home, right, the female in the household, right, having greater counter space in the bathroom, right? So that's the trade-off that we're making, that the tub is really not as important as having more vanity space. Other thing to think about here too is because it's a bungalow, we're basically it's sitting up, right? The plumbing is easier to move. If you're in a 1970 block construction home, that's going to cost you thousands of dollars to take this toilet, which you guys can't see, but it's ridiculously catty cornered in the bathroom. And you're going to have to move that toilet to the other side, so they're going to have to drudge out concrete in an older home, right? Which is immediately going to send your plumbing bill, it's going to double, right? It's going to increase for sure, because they just don't like dealing with the concrete. Usually, plumbers, in my experience, are prima donnas. They have the concrete, they drudge it all out, and you got to pay somebody else to take the concrete away. It's a mess, right? So, but I think the important trade-off here is we think that the counter space is a greater benefit than the freestanding tub, which is really, in my opinion, is kind of counterintuitive. You're like, oh, old house, clawfoot tub, that's the way to go. But we made the decision, hey, we're going to go greater counter space and move the toilet, which we can do here because it's not as expensive, because the plumbing is easier to access because the house just basically sits up on the block.
So some of the things that we're looking at, we're paying attention to structural cracks in a block home. If they're little hairline cracks, typically not a big deal. If they have like big gaping, if you're talking like an inch, like that's probably a legitimate structural issue. Undulation of floors, are there like super soft spots where you feel like you're gonna fall through the floor? We're also paying attention to things like plumbing. We want to open up cabinets and see, is there still cast iron under there? Guaranteed there's probably still cast iron under the house or under the slab, but has everything kind of flooring up been replaced? Is that all PVC? Is it newer, right? Is that to code? We want to look at the electrical panel. We want to look at kind of like the ages, like we're paying attention to like the ages of things to see, did people switch these out at some point? Was wiring that? And this is assuming that you don't have like a seller's disclosure, you're just kind of walking it and eyeballing it.
When you look at the electrical panel, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for age, right? Like, is it super old? Because that's an indication that the house has never been rewired and that you're going to have to replace the panel. I'm also looking at space. These houses, they didn't have the same electrical load when they were built, or even up in like the 50s and 60s, right, 70s. Like now we use a ton of power relative to what they used back then. So you can kind of take off outlets and stuff. You can look for, cloth wiring. Cloth wiring is super flammable, dangerous, and rewiring a house is a big expense, especially when the walls are plaster, because they have to cut into everything. And then we're looking at things like the layout for the plumbing. If you don't have to move refrigerator and dishwasher and sink, and all the plumbing can kind of stay where it's at, that's going to be a significantly cheaper remodel than if you have to reconfigure it to make sense. And when you're looking at this, I want you looking at it through the lens of a buyer. I don't want you looking at it as a cheap investor and just, so be realistic on, does this house need reconfiguration or not? And if it does, expect that you're going to spend more on your rehab for those sorts of things, right? So when we're looking for houses with good bones, we're looking at can we minimally reconfigure, whether we're talking about walls or plumbing or whatever it is. You guys are awesome. Thank you for listening to me ramble for a really, really long time. So I hope you guys got some good